everybody. Take us away, Mike.
All right, what are we doing today? Well, we're discussing, did AI really kill the digital transformation age or digital transformation in general? So welcome back, everyone, to another episode of AI Insights. I'm Mike Russell here with Steven Bowman, software guru and AI expert. And as usual, we've got a topic we're going to dig into, which did AI actually kill the digital transformation age already? And then we're going to be looking into some news, in this case, in one of NVIDIA's new offerings. So, all right, let us get into it. Digital transformation age. Before we start about whether AI killed it or not, just tell us about digital transformation. What does that mean? What is it? How is it pertinent? I mean, we hear the term all the time. You see it in newspapers. Yes, this company is undergoing digital transformation, or there's a job posting. Hey, we need you to help with the digital transformation. What's that about?
Yeah, we were talking a little bit before, and so I've been involved in tech since we'll call it late '90s, give or take 99, 2000, right on that cusp, and I was pretty deep in it, writing code or building computers or SANs and data warehousing and heavy data stuff, and it just got crazier and worse from there. Um, Digital transformation might be the most overused and least understood definition of the last 2 decades, in my opinion. And I tried to formulate a definition of what it is, and I defined it as a focus on integrating digital technologies into business processes. So the idea was pretty simple, and that was if you were performing a business process, where could you integrate existing technology into that business process, and what would it take? So for the most part, office buildings, whatever. This was also the time when, say, office buildings, whatever, clerical work, inter-office work, that kind of stuff. This is also when there was a really big push to get rid of paper. Stop printing, cut way back on paper. We're going to stick all of our documents onto a network share or a network drive. Um, Google Drive and all of that stuff came out in the years that followed. But focusing on integrating digital technology into business process is the definition that I came up with. And that spans such an amazingly large and wide swath of what everybody focused on for the last 25 years. When I would hear somebody bring it up, it's like, it was always kind of I don't know, I'm a geek. I wanted more details. Whenever someone would use the word system, oh, I input it into the system. Yeah, you just have to go and look into the thing and it'll show you it's in the system. I always wanted to know what the system meant. It was always this vague, it's like the mist. Whatever you're searching for is somewhere in that cloud over there. Go find it. And I always felt the same way about digital transformation. And I was reading this interesting article that talked about what I discerned from it was that AI was killing off digital transformation. So that's where we start.
Okay, well, so I'll add my bit to your introduction of digital transformation for just a moment then, because I look at it as you said, I mean, transformation in general has been so overused in the last 2 decades plus. I mean, transformation, if you look up, means a totally new, right? The original idea came from like, the caterpillar turning into chrysalis turning into a moth, that's a total transformation as opposed to changing pieces of it. Now, if I think
Sure.
about it purely from the paper to automated standpoint, well, that's transformation from one medium to another. Yet the R, as you said, that got attached to digital transformation was like way beyond. Because if I am automating or taking digital some part of a business process, that's the same thing we've been doing for how long now? It's more like 70, 80 years, in
Sure.
general. Obviously, some was done before that, but, if you talk about the advent of computers, even mainframes, they were relatively scarce, early 50s. By the time we got to the 60s, well, things started really cooking along. 70s picked up, 80s, went from, well, 70s went from, mainframes to mini computers, 80s, generally speaking, we introduced
Sure.
microcomputers or PCs. All this stuff is automating what we were doing. So I think the interesting part of this is too, well, how is AI killing off digital transformation if AI itself is digital? And then secondly, which is an extended discussion, is did digital transformation mean that the business process itself was changing or just being automated?
Yeah,
Right. So,
great.
so what about AI? This is the thing, is how is AI? It's a digital thing killing another digital thing.
You just brought up a great point, which is they call it a transformation, but it's really not. It's just a tiny little tweak on an existing model or an existing process, right? And we're incorporating new tools. We went from a shovel to a bulldozer, but it's still extracting dirt from one spot and putting it somewhere else, right? And that's where the AI killing the digital transformation comes in, because what we're talking about here is we're talking about the rise of what they call business model innovation. And business model innovation works much more, I think, along the lines of what you were alluding to, which is we're not trying to take an existing process and transplant a manual step with a digital step. Instead, we're taking a look at the entire process, the entire workflow, or the entire model, and we're saying, how can the implementation of AI either completely remove these steps, or how do we supplant the need for some of these steps by using this technology instead? So instead of swapping out components, this is a complete rewrite. And when I say complete rewrite, a lot of what this idea hinges upon is the idea of it's the sausage factory. This is, sorry if this comes into, sorry vegans, I actually was vegan for more than a year, but I couldn't get the rest of my household to do it with me. So I'm back to eating animal products. But if you think about a sausage factory, right? Animals go in one side, boxes of sausage come out the other. The inner workings of what transpires in that black box are, every factory is a little bit different. Every implementation is a little bit different. There's intellectual property there. Maybe this company does it a certain way, or they've got special ingredients, or they keep the building freezing because that's what they found they have to do to get the meat a particular consistency when they go to process it. Whatever it is. Where I'm going is that with business model innovation, we've got the ability now with generative AI to give it a series of inputs and tell it the output that we expect and let it build the process to do that work instead of us programming it in one way, shape, or form, whether that's through software code or a standard operating procedure document or actual line by line code in software, or the instructions that we would give our digital agent. Instead, again, we focus on here's our inputs, very well defined. Here's our expected output. And one of the things that I've found that works best with AI, you guys will hear me say this over and over and over again. Here's an example of how it turned out really perfect last time, right? Giving it that example for it to build on. Now, all of a sudden, out of nowhere, we're not transforming something, we're innovating. This is new, this is different, and we're leveraging the technology at a different level than we have in the past. In this time, it can actually be, in my opinion, it can feel like it's actually transformational rather than a small stepping stone, which I think digital transformation was a misnomer anyway.
Okay, all right. So let me say a contrarian position and have you react to it based on what you said. So I got inputs, I got outputs that I want, right? I'm describing the basic boundaries of whatever is going to happen in the center, right?
Yep.
Those processes. Um, so is my business model really changing? Because the top level definition of a business model is I've got certain types of inputs, there's a transformation that occurs, and I'm producing something on the other side, something of value, right? And within the overall environment, it's a value to whoever the customers are, recipients, users, whatever, you know. So is this actually not business model transformation, but more of automation? I'm just letting it decide the details of the transformation that happens inside the black box.
It definitely could be, and that definitely can be one aspect of it. But there's also it's not a flip side to the coin. It's just another dimension of this, and that is what new opportunities do I have that we haven't been able to think of based on this newly created or newly refined process. This new innovation can open up new doors to revenue, savings, opportunities, market absorption, market acquisition, right? It's again, it's another one of those things where instead of being focused on an individual process, once that the innovation is dropped in, you simply ask the question, what else can we do with this? And I think that's where the possibilities open up. That's where generative AI gets a right. Anybody who uses it and beat it up and has had the epiphany, they go, wow, that thing's amazing. That's why AI is awesome. And then there's the other folks who, again, depending on the level of input, depending on the amount of context provided, depending on the techniques used to give the engine enough context, they don't have that epiphany. They're not impressed with the output to the tune where they're saying, hey, maybe this can help me come up with new ways, new things, new innovations.
Well, I think that latter part is the key part, right? Because if I just ask it to automate, if you will, I'll use that term, from the
Yep.
inputs to the outputs, um, then I'm getting some value out of it, but I'm not getting necessarily the breakthrough value because now for the first time, instead of taking, a part of the process and we say, let's automate this chunk of the process or the whole thing, but we build the automation as opposed to having AI build it for us, first of all. But secondly, in doing that building of the automation, in that process, it was the humans coming up with any expansions or innovation ideas or whatever. Now we're getting feedback or potential or feedback about potential innovations or different ways of using it or different ways of solving the problem
Yep.
that's I'm going to say directly human because obviously generative AI is built on a lot of input and history and everything else. So I guess that's the way that I would characterize the difference is and I'll go back to, all right, I'm gonna carbon date myself here, back to when I was teaching a business systems analysis and design course, 1980, college level, right, that was the idea that the general process was is you look at a business model and the system that implemented that model, right? So, I mean, the textbook at the time, one of the favorite examples they used was like a golf course and the golf pro shop and how do you use automation to improve, what humans are doing or keeping records and all that kind of stuff.
Sure.
But so there are really always two questions. One was, where are the boundaries of where I can profitably and effectively implement automation, right? So there are different parts of the system. There will be boundaries that I'm going to insert automation, and it made sense
Absolutely.
there. Maybe it didn't make sense all over based on the capabilities of the time. And secondly, this is the question of, I think, which pertains to what you're talking about, is all right, now that I've got this capability, are there other things I can do with it that maybe I couldn't do before? Maybe the
Absolutely.
record keeping of who came and played golf, and what they bought in the pro shop was so onerous, or I didn't do it, or I didn't want to pay somebody to do it. But if I put some kind of just basic point of sale system in, now I've got that data and I can find out, hey, these 10 golfers are the ones providing most of our revenue. Here are the things that they like. Maybe I gift them one, a sleeve of their favorite golf balls when they come someday, right? Generate the loyalty. I mean,
Absolutely.
stuff like that. So this I see as the same thing with a third level added, and now that AI is also going to make suggestions about how can I improve my automation or my process or whatever. Now we haven't gotten to the business model part of it yet, but I just wanted to focus on this piece. Like, what's this flavor difference in what's happening?
So one of the things that I think that it's not flashy or it's not sexy to most people, but the way that generative AI works, and we don't have to go way down the rabbit hole on this one, but for lack of a better way of putting it, based on the words that are used in its prompt and the question that is asked, it goes and finds patterns of those words in its huge volume of database. And then it guesses on the way that it sticks words together to come up with an answer for you that makes sense based on the question that it believes you're asking. And that might, there's a lot of things in there where I think a lot of people kind of scratch their head. I know I did it first, but here's where I was able to connect the dots at a very high level. It's pattern matching. It's
Yep, it's
algorithmic
always patterns. That's
pattern
right.
matching. Okay. And pattern matching is all about data, right? The, the ancient Mayans pattern matched the sky over time and realized that there's a 28,000-year cycle that whatever. Where I'm going with this is that when we've got data and we can identify patterns that transpire, the human mind can see that pattern when we piece it together. But the power of AI gives us the ability to take large, even computing before this version of AI, previous versions of AI specialized in data analytics and pattern matching. That's part of what gave birth to generative AI. The 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 individual point that you just brought up, I think, is one of the core promises of AI that people overlook. It's hyper personalization, but it's all based on pattern matching. And just by having data in a system that
Right.
you can immediately hand off to AI in real time, that scans a license plate when somebody drives into the golf course to know that John likes Bloody Marys and he always buys 6 golf balls every time. So why wouldn't the bar cart girl be alerted to that and have all of the stuff that she needed to make his day to help improve whatever it was that he was going to purchase over and over and over again? And that type of disruption, that type of business model change, I think is the level in which we need to be thinking about when we talk about, right, when we talk about digital transformation. That was just point of sale, right? That was point of sale tied in with a report that said, that matched and file output to your inventory management system. That way you would buy golf balls from CDW or wherever you needed to, and it would already be on your sheet. That was absolutely wonderful for some businesses. But the next level of this, again, in my opinion, is data analytics and hyper personalization at a scale, not maybe real time, maybe near real time, but real time enough so that when John gets out of his car, the valet's got a message on his phone that says, John, don't forget to pick up your golf balls and your Bloody Mary on your way to your car. It's already ready for you. And I think that's the type of disruption that we're talking about. And the thing where I think it's important is I don't think that people are thinking of AI on that scale yet. And that's why it's simple. People don't do it yet. A lot of people don't do it yet. But it's simple that once you've got a process rewritten, once you've got that innovation in place, to then go back to AI and say, what else can I do with this? How do I need to be thinking about working with this? What are the top 5 questions I need to ask on how to take this one implementation and 10x it, make more revenue, improve business processes, reduce cost, whatever the goals of the business are. And that's a big part of this. And it was outlined here. The goals of what we're trying to accomplish with AI have to align with the business goals. The business would love more revenue, but if the business goals are to save money and reduced expenses, more revenue is not going to solve that problem. It's probably going to create more problems. So
Right.
Aligning the output of what we're looking to do with what the capabilities are. And again, we're getting there. More and more people that I talk to are getting here, but telling the AI agent that you're working with that story. This is what we're trying to do. This is what we're trying to accomplish. This is the innovation that we're looking for. We gave you this. We expect this out. You did great. What do we do with it now? Having conversations at that level with an AI agent is where I think most people, they're not there yet. They need to get there. That's when
Okay.
that's when these 100x, 1000x type jumps are going to start happening for them in their business.
So let's go back to my example again, right? The business systems analysis and
Yep.
design. So the zero part of it actually, which I didn't get to because I was focusing more on the automation. The first part was what's the most effective business process that will implement this business model? Then you decide the automation boundaries, then you know, automate, then you decide, hey, what things can we do given, you know, current automation that might allow me to improve the process
Sure.
that implements the business model.
Sure.
I'm going to come back to that in a minute. So I just wanted to make that connection, right? Because this is a little bit about what we're talking about. If I go to the hyper personalization, you know, it's not necessarily, well, we could argue either way, right? Is it a change to the business model? Well, the business model is to provide, you know, the golf experience along with food and beverage that enhances or whatever. I am improving that experience by the hyper personalization, by,
Absolutely.
you know, doing things. I might find more things to sell. I might find more things. I might find different ways of selling, you know. We'll get into that later. But again, I think there's a boundary of the business model versus the process to implement the business model. Now, do I fundamentally change my business model? Well, all right, now let's go back to that for a second. So, um, you know, you mentioned the rise of business model innovation. Well, I think business model innovation's been around for a while. Gary Hamel and others in the 1990s were big on it, right?
Sure.
Tom Peters in the 80s, you know, he was talking about excellence, you know, talked about, you know, differences in business models and so on. So I don't think that has necessarily changed. I think the idea is that when I look at my business model, which again, if I think on all my inputs, right, I got my process, my transformation, something that provides value on the other side, and it can be circular, right? Because the customers can be providing some of the inputs.
Sure.
Well, some of that model innovation that can occur beyond just the process is maybe that allows me to have different sets of customers, or maybe it allows me to have different sets of products as part of my overall business model. Maybe I can go to a different market and
Yeah.
apply it. Maybe, you know, I can do it with different inputs. So it starts to change things. I mean, one of the great simplifications, I think, of a business model beyond Hamels and everything else, or implementations of those, I should say, is the business model canvas, which breaks it down into 9 blocks. Top level, just describe what's your business model, right? It doesn't say what's automated. It just says, who are the customers? How do you get to them? You know, what's the channels you get to them? What's the unique value proposition? What are the things that we do with those inputs that are coming in? And oh, by the way, what are the inputs that are coming in? What does all that stuff cost? What does the revenue come and so on, right? So my push on that is that, you know, again, like digital transformation, you know, let's be clear, is that are we actually changing the business model? Or are we, like you pointed out earlier, are we improving the efficiency of how we implement the business model or effectiveness of it, or are we actually changing the business model? I mean, this is like a whole other subject, but you know, AI is starting to get into there because, as you said, once I go beyond if I take these inputs and those outputs, do the process for me, but now I can start talking about, well, what other patterns have you seen like this? Like, I'll go back again to my now getting overworn golf club and golf pro shop example, is instead of someone, meaning the students I was teaching, right, figuring out how to develop and design, take the business needs and come up with a process and a business model, right? Formalize the model, come up with processes and do it right, the business system.
Yep.
Now I can ask AI, say, hey, I'm thinking about starting a golf course. What are the predominant business models out there for profitability and for efficient operations, right? And I can get a whole bunch of things. Now I don't have to do that like bare sheet. I can if I want, but that's another way of doing it, right? Coming around. And that may be the first question to ask is after maybe doing the process research is, like you said, don't fail. I know I'm going on about this a little bit, but it's important. Don't
Oh,
fail to ask about what are the possibilities or what am I missing here? Or what about the overall goals, might be different or broader. Or, I mean, there's the list of prompts go way beyond the kind that you normally see. Oh, here's 50 prompts to use.
I think you just touched on, right? A lot of, in my experience, a lot of business is based on the ego of whoever's running the business. Um, Good, bad, or indifferent. Lots of businesses run in a wonderful way. People have wonderful motivators for running those businesses. But how many business leaders on a regular basis think to themselves, I wonder if there's a better way to do this? Even if it's a core fundamental business process or a model in which they're using for their business. Once you've got a level of business process, innovation, a certain level of automation, I love what you just brought up. Hey, this is our pattern. You can see everything that's going on. Here's the data that represents it. Take it back to AI and say, what other successful business models are there? How can I incorporate their winning strategies into what I've got? How could I change my business model to be more successful than I already am? That is a wonderful question and a wonderful possibility that, because of the amount of data that's sitting out there, is actually available right now. Um, that
Right.
just that just that just tickled my brain, Mike. Nice job.
All right, all right. So I mean, we could obviously that's a huge area we could go down. But for the moment, what other things did you want to talk about around digital transformation, AI killing it, whatever around that before we move on to the news of the week?
Yeah, I think there's one other thought that I wanna kind of bring up with you, and I'd love to get your insight on it. It's been a while since I've worked in corporate America, either as an employee or as a consultant, or brought my firm in to a larger corporation. But the question is really, what strategies can a company implement to cultivate a culture of continuous innovation? And how do you think AI fits into that in the corporate world? You think they're going to wait too long? You think smaller guys are going to pass them by? What do you think about that?
Oh, good grief. That's
Three
that's
books
like,
from
that's
now?
not just a big hole to jump into. That's like a whole cliff. So the right, so let's for a moment, let's just make sure, I'll say culture, I'll separate that, the idea of continuous innovation as a type of culture, right? So culture is, the common definition that's often used is, that was redundant, is the idea is that's how we do things around here. This is how we work. If I would reduce it a little bit further, it's um, the composite or the combined behavior of everyone and everything in the organization. Now, I said everyone and everything for two reasons. One, obviously, you think of behavior, you think of people, right? But things like branding, that's a type of behavior, how the company interacts with the environment, the marketplace, types of buildings, outside design, inside design. Those
Yep.
are all things that bring forth a point of view, if you will, and reinforce something about what this organization is about, right? But fundamentally, it's behavior. Now, if we're talking anything with human beings involved, right? Behavior is not normally like I flick a switch and it goes from one type of habit to a completely different kind of habit. Right? It's
Sure.
not normally so. Now I can change out the circuit board and I got a new behavior right away, right? I can put a new program in. I got a new behavior right away. So the things I can generally change. But continuous innovation goes more to individual behavior. And let's talk about it from two aspects. One is how much continuous innovation do I want? How do I decide, by the way, if it's good or not, or if it's beneficial or not beneficial? And then how do we get the culture? So I'm going to go to that first thing first is, all innovation isn't great. Sometimes it works well, sometimes it isn't for us, right? So there's
Absolutely.
always part of anything around continuous innovation, or we can broaden it again, any kind of change. You got to look at both the benefit and the cost of doing it and make the decision, right? So that idea about making the decision about do we make this change and then how do we adjust our behaviors to match the change to get the benefits that we're expecting about it, that really characterizes any kind of organizational change, right? So
Sure.
if continuous innovation is a type of organizational change, then that means I'm focusing on how can we make things better? I mean, well, I won't use the innovation word, right? Because I can get hung up. But how can I make things better, right? And so it's a type of change, and the same question comes back. It's that benefit versus investment piece, benefit versus cost. Um, there is a balance because I can be making changes so fast that, in fact, I outstrip my customer's ability to keep up, right? The market
Yeah.
can't keep up, right? Now, that's not what we want. Often the bigger issue is that people can't change fast enough inside behavior-wise, making it enough into a habit level because I take the old simplification of if I make a change, I go for and it's something I've been doing for a while or enough that I can do it unconsciously. It's an actual habit. I go from unconscious competence all the way back to unconscious incompetence. We say we want to make a change, right? Well, then I become conscious that I'm incompetent at doing it the new way to some level. Then I can become competent enough, but I have to do it. I have to think about doing it. It's not habit, right? Then it becomes habit, unconscious competence at some point in time. But if I'm changing so fast that I never get to that point, then there's an overhead in a company that needs to be factored in to because it's not as efficient to do things where you have to think about it, how you do it, and change it each time as if you're doing it just because it's habit unconsciously, right? There's more about that, but I'm going down a little bit of a rabbit hole here because culture is a deep subject. Now, as you said, what do well, I'll take leaders and executives. We'll just go right for the jugular here, right? So people generally want stability most of the time, right? From a work perspective, so at least some level of stability. Now, continuous improvement from a worker's perspective can be good because that gives me stability of a job. If we don't change, then the company is going to go under and I lose my job, right? So there's some pretty fair impetus if the change is really required. From a leaders and executives perspective, though, it's how can I characterize this? There is there's a book called The Dictator's Handbook. And what it's about is that from a leader's perspective, the danger is trying to remain in the position and or power that you have, right? And so their stability goal there is, I'll do whatever I need to as long as it doesn't disrupt where I am level wise, or how can I get ahead, right? It's another version of from the individual standpoint, but it's much more important because often they're the deciding factors on does innovation happen or not,
Mm.
right? Because if the leader isn't oriented towards innovation and it's a culture where nothing happens unless the leader says so, well, I'm less likely to have innovation. If it's a culture where, the leader is open to it, even if it may threaten them, I'll say threaten in quotes, in
Sure,
some way,
sure.
and the culture and the work processes and systems are set up so that individuals can improve their area of work continuously, that's a completely different ballgame. It may not be the mega level, but it can be at the work level. And that's the other thing I didn't bring up about continuous innovation is what level are you talking about? You talking about the individual, day to day? We can implement that. Are we talking about the overall company as far as new products, new markets, new business models? Well, that's another level. That
Yeah,
takes
sure.
leadership.
Excellent.
I'll stop
Excellent.
there, but there's, like I said, those both of those
Down
words,
the
culture and innovation, is just like
down the rabbit hole. I think, all kidding aside, I think that, and I saw this a lot growing up in the tech boom, if you will, the post.com bubble, in the industry. I saw a lot of change for the sake of change, and then people complaining that it didn't work. Or they brought in an expert who said, this is what we're going to change because it's the newest thing that's out there, whether it was how they manage software, how they manage teams, or that kind of stuff. And it turned out to be a dud. It did not work. Maybe that's because it didn't fit the culture of the company, the culture of the crew.
well, usually.
But what I think was more important, something else that you just said, which really struck a nerve with me, is before they sit down to make any change, what's the desired outcome? How do we articulate that so that we've got something to measure success against in the future? Because that's why we're doing this. And nobody's really got a crystal ball, right? I mean, we're not going to see the future. We have to draw a picture of what we think it looks like, and then compare what it's really like against that to determine how good of a job we did or not. Is it successful or not, right? And I
Yeah.
saw I saw a lot of change that I characterize it as change for the sake of change, where it's the newest innovation, so we got to implement it, but it didn't work.
It's the organizational form of keeping up with the Joneses, right?
Yes.
Well, obviously everybody's doing it. We need to do it, right?
Yeah.
Does it going to help us? I don't know, but let's do it. And particularly from a technology, a chief technology officer or chief information officer standpoint, it's tough because with all the changes in the digital world, technology, everybody, every executive, other than the other executives, even the CEO, hey, this looks great. Why don't we do this, right?
Right. Right. I
And,
said,
so you kind of end up, going along with the tide, but you nailed it. I mean, it's like, well, will this actually benefit us? What are we doing? And and so, well, I'm going to, we're going to set everything else aside here and take the other thing you said about take it to the top level, right? What are the benefits of what we're doing? At the top level for any organization, what's the mission? In other words, what's our purpose? Why are we here? What kind of benefits we're going to bring to the world, through our customers, et cetera. What's our values? What are our values about that characterize our behavior in going about our mission? And then there's the vision about, well, do we want any changes to how we currently execute or, achieve our mission in the future? Now, the mission usually is implemented and the values are usually implemented in a business model. I'm bringing it back now to our business model, right?
right back to
Right.
the
And
beginning.
the processes that then the systems and processes that implement that business model. the vision is how we're going to change all that, right, to better achieve our purpose, our mission,
Yeah.
but also within the context of those values. Those values are the top level definition of the culture. So if those don't match, what we're trying to do, we got a problem. We've also got a problem if the vision isn't shared, if everybody doesn't understand it or buy into it.
Yep.
And by the way, on top of all that, then you hear this term strategic plan, right? Well,
Sure.
a strategic plan is actually fundamentally how am I making changes to my strategy or my business model that we're just talking about here, right? To better achieve our mission. But a lot of stuff in most strategic plans aren't that, right? They're just like,
Right.
yeah, we're going to continue to sell in this market. Okay, that doesn't change. All right, fine. But that doesn't change my business model. It doesn't necessarily, and the business model is simply the expression of what my strategy is. So now, I went off on that a little bit, but yeah, I agree with you. That's
That's okay. Excellent. Excellent. Ladies and gentlemen, Mike Russell.
well,
Excellent.
we
It's
happen to be hitting in some areas today that, and you come back to digital transformation, just like I said, does it fit our vision? Does it help us get there? Does it help us, go with the values and so on? Okay.
sure. Super cool. Super cool. Okay. Are you ready to move on to news of the week?
Yeah, absolutely. All
Okay.
right. NVIDIA, other than being expensive, but really, if you bought it when it was cheap, you're now really well off. But other than that aspect of it, what about NVIDIA?
Um, so a couple of months ago, I was working with Roberta Ravella, and we built our first piece of agentic architecture where we had multiple agents doing multiple jobs, working together, and we were producing marketing material, digital marketing material. So we'd sit down and ask about 15 minutes worth of interview style questions, press an easy button, and out would spit, give or take, about a month's worth of content. We could tailor it how we wanted. Really neat implementation. And then from there, we extended that idea into a very specific use case, which generated quizzes, web-based quizzes, c3quiz.ai. Pretty cool thing we worked on. And it's funny because what she said is, I need a quiz and I need you to create me an easy button. Those were her directions for me. So that's what we ran with. And it was interesting when I caught an article the other day that said NVIDIA launches an easy button for creating generative AI workflows. And when I looked at it, what is it called here? It's called NVIDIA AI Workbench. And when I think of NVIDIA, my brain went in about 60 different directions and I caught most of it. But when I think about NVIDIA, I think of hardware. And when I
Sure.
think of hardware, my brain immediately just goes to IBM. So I actually grew up in a town named Boca Raton, Florida. And Boca Raton, Florida was IBM headquarters for a long time. And that's actually the town, and I've been in the building where Bill Gates said, I want to sell software. And IBM said, we don't care about Windows. We're just going to sell hardware instead. So I don't know if NVIDIA channeled their inner Microsoft, or I have no idea where it came from, but basically what they're going to do is they're going to embed software on their chips in an effort to provide an environment that allows you to build workflows and automation without needing a third-party piece of software or anything else like that. Now, again, when you dig into the details, NVIDIA AI Workbench, it's available now. You can download it. It's software. They, of course, want you to either use their virtual hardware or buy some of your own hardware. Details to be determined later. But what I thought was really interesting was that right, Intel builds CPUs and maybe motherboards, and they don't have anything to do with software except for a little bit of configuration software to work on their
Some
chips.
drivers, right, to go to the
Exactly,
chips, right?
drivers, exactly, configuration software and drivers. You got it, right? a lot of these big time hardware vendors do not delve into software at all. And I thought it was extraordinarily interesting that NVIDIA is now going to try to bridge that gap between their GPU systems and software that's going to run on their GPUs. They've got some plug and play stuff already ready for you. So nothing that you can't do in, say, ChatGPT right now. So one of the big things they talked about was chat with your documents using retrieval augmented generation. That's RAG. So that's what we talked about before, right? A model scrapes all of the data out of your PDF and it sees how it's arranged. And then you can ask it questions and it understands, it mimics understanding of the information in that document, and then gives you answers based on all of the other stuff it found in its vector database and its underlying database. And then you can combine your LLM with a generative LLM like ChatGPT, and you get the information. So stuff that you can already currently do, but in this model, you don't have to interact with OpenAI. You don't have to interact with the larger LLMs. One of the other things when we get real nerdy that they talk about here is they talk about being able to customize your own large language model at any scale. They've got 2 example projects. If you're a developer, if you're a geek, you're going to look at this because you know what Mistral 7B is, you know what Llama 2 is, you know what GitHub is, you know where to go get it on GitHub. If you don't know what that means, just know that number 3 is something that might make a lot more sense. You can download software and you can essentially create your own DALL-E project. So you can feed it information that you want it to have, and then you can generate your own images out of it. And the reason why this is important and where I think this goes, and the reason why it really touched my brain, is because there's a lot of talk in some of the circles that I'm in about sharing your data with the large vendors, sharing your data with ChatGPT or with Gemini or with Claude, let's say, in the way that if you've got intellectual property, if you've got a proprietary process, if you've got something that's your special sauce, the second that you give it to those large vendors, they've got it too. And they're going to take it and they're going to train their models on your stuff. And so I certainly don't want to discount that, because there are some concerns there, because as candidly as we can say this, when we hand them that data, we don't know what they do with it. I can tell you what I think they do with it, and it's all the bad stuff we just described. But we don't know. It's a black box, right? Something goes in this side and boxes of something else comes out the other side. That black box process, we don't have any insight into what's really going on. Now, they'll say, here's our source code, you can go look it up. But again, it's another one of those things of what do you do? Who do you trust? I think where NVIDIA is going here, and why this is important with these first baby steps, is because I think that they're going to open up a marketplace where when someone has their own body of work, when somebody has custom function that they want to perform and use, but they don't want to share that data with OpenAI, they don't want to share that data with Anthropic, they don't want to share that data with Google. This looks like a legitimate way to be able to set up a workflow to perform an operation while your data is protected from the big boys. That's where I think this is going.
So, in a sense, maybe if you're doing that, they're trying, let me see if I can describe this correctly. They're potentially building an ecosystem where instead of the current binary choice, I'll give all my data to the big 3 or whoever, right? Or I keep it around my data, but I can't let anybody else use it because they'll have my data, just because of the nature of the way the models are currently set up.
Yep.
To a environment where it's not quite like open source or something like that. It's more like available functions, right? So if I think about well, again, geek side, right? A programming language, it comes with one and maybe none, but I got certain functions in it that it's already preset to approve or whatever. I mean, it's kind of like now, if I want to do something, I can use yours, Steven's LLM or whatever AI that you've set up and its data in a way that doesn't expose all of your data for someone else to take and train their models, but in a way that I can harness your expertise, your ideas and whatever to to implement what I'm doing rather than recreating the wheel, right? Because right now it's either give them all your data or recreate the wheel, right? Every
Right.
time because I'm building my own thing. Is that somewhat accurate? Is that kind of I can look at a menu of, hey, you want this kind of function? Well, somebody's already got something that does this sort of thing.
Yes. And I believe that let's call those workflows, let's call those processes, let's call those functions. I love the word function. I think the future involves a lot of publicly available functions from somebody who says, I'll protect your data and I know how to perform an RFM analysis. So I specialize in this function. Send me your data. I'll run the function. I'll send you the results back. And that interaction and your data is safe from the big boys. It's almost like layered or hierarchied information flow, where the processing is happening in a secure environment. The function is probably owned by a third party. The actual black box is owned by a third party. Our stuff goes in, it gets crunched, our result goes out, but you don't have the concern about data training and intellectual property theft by the big boys.
Yeah,
Yes.
so maybe another example that will help people who aren't that familiar with automation. So these days, if you go to a doctor and you get a blood test for whatever reason, I'm going to use, the idea of I'm drawing a blood sample, and for whatever type of analysis they order, it comes back with whatever the absolute value is, like, how much iron you have in your blood, white blood cell count, all those kind of things. But almost always there's another column that says, is it within the historic, I'm going to define historic here in a second, data range or the
Sure.
acceptable data range. You don't have access when you get the test results back to all that data that they're saying, here's the normal range that we calculated for this based on all these patients, based on lab research, this, that, and the other, right? But I get the benefit of somebody having done that.
Yep.
And so I think what you're describing is the same thing, right? I can get the benefit of somebody's running an analysis on something, in this case, the blood, right? Without
Yep.
seeing all the data behind it, without seeing the algorithms, without seeing the proprietary research, maybe.
Right.
But I can still get the benefit of it. Now I got to pay for it, but that's the value exchange, usually a lot less than if I came up with my own machine to do the blood, analysis, came up with all the, did all the research, right? All those things, would be, I still didn't like the price, but, nevertheless, it's way
Speed,
cheaper,
speed to market as well, right?
right? Oh, yeah.
The ability to not only find what you're looking for extraordinarily quickly, but be able to act on it same day, same hour, same minute, in some cases. Absolutely.
Yeah, so perfect example from a health perspective, right? Even if I had enough money to do all that stuff, to replicate the research, to get the machines, put it all together in the lab, all the time it would take, if something was really badly wrong, well, that could take too long, for my particular case, right? So yeah, I mean, the time that's a really, starkly drawn, so to speak, example, but it's still the idea, right? A business idea can die if it's not out there soon enough. It can be overtaken by the market, right? Every business idea has a time frame, short, Some are like really long,
Yep.
but it just depends. And that opportunity, that window can come and go.
Excellent. 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 That's
Uh,
all.
so I, I'm, for this, why not? We're just having a conversation, right? By the way, folks, this isn't detail scripted. We we have points we want to talk about, but then we have a conversation. So I'll
Again,
just point out that things like NVIDIA now doing software with their hardware, it's kind of cyclical, right? So if I consider when computers were originally built, whoever built the computer built the software, if there was software. Even continuing into mainframes and mini computers and microcomputers, typically you needed an operating system before you could use languages or apps or anything else, right? On
absolutely.
my iPhone, it's got an iOS, right?
iOS.
Internet, I mean, the operating system. But on that, I can put all the apps I want, which kind of implements this choice, this order, right? What kind of thing
Yep.
is somebody already built that I can do? It's just that after we got past the PC, the microcomputer age, by that time, the normal was, unless you're in the Apple world, right, of where you can only use Apple's OS on their hardware, unless you're hacking, we're not getting there, right? But all the rest of the hardware, the default was Windows. So the hardware manufacturers like Dell or Samsung or any of the others, I'm using PCs, right, as an example, most people are familiar with,
Yep.
they didn't write their own operating systems anymore. They didn't write any of the apps for the language. They just built those low-level things that allowed that operating system to interact with their hardware, right? The drivers in between. But
Yep.
that's not how it used to be. You used to buy a computer from IBM, you got the operating, you had to get their operating system, as
Yep.
useless as well. Same thing with HP or, Burroughs digital equipment. Now I'm really getting, older computers there.
Sure.
Um, so um, it's not, what I'm saying is that the interesting thing about this is that it's not that there's no precedent. It's that there's no recent precedent,
Sure.
which means that they're pretty smart in figuring out, hey, how can we take this, as we often say, is like most industries are 20, 30, 50 years behind somehow, right? In catching up, or they haven't caught up with the cycle coming back. They're pretty smart in thinking, hey, nobody does this anymore. Is there an opportunity for us
Right.
do something along these lines to create the AI operating system in which all these apps and stuff can be put?
Quite. Quite possibly. We'll see where it goes. The there was another in the middle, and this is a rabbit hole we can go down. We'll let everybody else go for the rest of the day. But in the mid 2000s, I got into Linux quite a bit, and that was a different way of using hardware that was intended for other purposes.
Right, but it was also built on the other part of the name, Unix, the
Yep.
idea, right?
Yep.
Unix
Yep.
was built as a multi-platform operating system.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but well, I mean, the interesting about Heritage, Apple building its own operating system for its own hardware, the concept of the operating system for the Mac and then the iOS came from, you remember? Do you,
No.
all right, came from Xerox's Palo Alto
Those.
Research Center Park,
Okay.
right? Because they built a computer that had not only the operating system, which was their version, right? But it also had the applications on it. Because the
Yeah.
concept of the mouse, the desktop, which is we call on most PCs now, it actually was a visualization of the desktop. The Xerox Star was the name of the computer. You turn on the screen, you had a desk. It had an inbox, an outbox for when emails come in, emails go out. It had, like something to represent printing. It had all, if you wanted to write a document, you could start start that, do it. But they created the entire ecosystem.
Yeah.
It's interesting when Steve Jobs saw that, he's like, aha. Not gonna pour it over, but the concept of how they did it in a closed system continued as well.
Yeah.
As opposed to your example earlier, I'm bringing this up because you said IBM chose not to do the software and
Right.
decided they asked first, infamously, digital research for the CPM operating system. Gary Gildall decided he didn't want somebody else to control it. He didn't think it was, he thought he could do better. He asked Bill Gates, and Bill Gates said, of course.
Excellent. 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 Okay.
Well, I think we've probably covered enough for today.
I just looked at the time. I hope.
Time flies when you're having fun, really.
Yeah, no, wonderful. Thank you, Mike. Thank you for your insights. It's
Yeah,
great.
this was fun, everyone. Come join us for the next session or look at the back sessions if you want, back installments, and we'll see you next time.
Excellent.